Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully a few more folks join. Oh, there's Drew. Drew, good morning. We got a big weekend happening for Microcosm. I think I have 10 athletes running 100s tomorrow. So I'm a little bit anxiety ridden today with regard to that.
100s are
not
always
sleep well last night.
Spicy for watching.
Yeah. So yeah, it should be quite a weekend for Microcosm. I think this could be the big hurrah of the summer.
Yeah.
Hopefully people, maybe the racing situation is going to start to come to a slow.
Well, then I feel like it picks up in the South.
The South, what goes on in the South?
Well, it's
people
too
like
hot to race. Right?
Yeah. The Yeti 100's coming up. I've got a couple athletes doing that. That's a big one. That's in 2 weeks. I'm Tough is this weekend.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah, we have 2 athletes doing that.
Mm-hmm. I have one doing the Superior 100.
Oof. Wasatch 100's going down this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Steep Mountain 100.
Mm-hmm.
Got an athlete doing that.
How do you have so many athletes and like keep tabs on everyone? I feel like I've got enough where I can, like, I don't have a ton that race on the same weekend like you do. So I'm able to like keep tabs and do athlete tracking and all that kind of stuff. But with like 10, you've got to just like nervously await the logs or text messages or something. Like you've got to have like super anxiety.
I definitely get nervous about it, but I've been doing this for a while. So I'm able to like, also, I work really hard not to try not to associate my overall well-being with the outcomes of the athletes' races. That's just unhealthy for me to do. So that's been a huge work in progress for me. Yeah, especially like outside of the races too, just in terms of like whether an athlete, wants to stick with the program or not. I try not to be attached to like athlete outcomes in the same way that like I try not to be attached to my race results and things like that. I think that the two things work kind of in a similar way. And like, yeah, it's hard to keep tabs, but like most of these races don't actually have live tracking. And Saturday is my day off. And just because my athletes are racing, that's the one day off I get every week. So I actually put the computer away and look forward to reading kind of the recaps or when I get text, like look forward to checking those things out on Sunday. Because I'm pretty strict about my Saturday boundaries since, again, one day off a week. I really need that day off. Yeah. So I don't know, do you kind of approach it differently?
I mean, I love watching races and I love studying how things unfold. So like if there is tracking and I have an athlete or a friend, like I just love tracking because like I don't watch football. Like I don't get up on Sunday and watch football. I stay up late on like Saturday night and like refresh the like Leadville tracker. Like that to me is how I engage with sport. So I enjoy it. It doesn't really bring, like, to me, it feels like a spectator. Like I love to be engaged in that way. But also it is like, it's difficult. Like if you're watching someone have a bad race, there's always like, oh man, are they going to blame me? Or like, oh man, like it sucks to, have someone like do the work and then not have the day. Like the world doesn't owe you shit. So like you can put down the best training block in the world and still have a shit race. And that's just like, that's like how, like if running would be a lot less interesting if you just like showed up to the race and like submitted your training log and you're like, here, like I did perfect. So give me my gold star now. It's all about who's able to execute on a certain day. And, you're not always going to be able to, and that's why it's amazing. And that's why it's hard. And so you just always want people to be able to execute, but you have to be in this space of like, I want this person to have the best day possible. And I also want to have given them the tools to work through and grow from a bad day.
Interesting. I think that's all great. I do feel like sometimes there's a little overemphasis on, you have a bunch of athletes racing. Some of them are doing their first hundreds. there's like always this overemphasis on like, well, can the coach make me a race plan? Tell me how fast to run. And it's like, no.
Our coach does not make us race plans.
Like you can't do that because it's your race to run. You have to invest that time, and you have to get out there and experience it for yourself in order to get better over time.
Also, we're not like hoarding a secret for like executing an ultra. I wish we did, because like that would be great. Like that would make our job so much easier if I could just be like, oh, you just do this and then you'll be fine.
Right. And there's so many variables really. So like for us, it's all about, at least for me, it's all about, trying to support the athlete along the way. And then usually like the Friday before, that's when the athlete really has to just take the reins for themselves. You've developed all these tools over the course of your training block. You have these hopefully some new perspectives. You feel confident going into the race. Like as a coach, and you feel fresh, mentally ready to go. Like that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my athletes. It's like set you up for that. And then the Friday before, here you go. Sometimes I don't even reply to Friday check-ins because again, like the athlete, you need to engage now. It's not up to me to hold your hand here. You have to run the race yourself. I'm not going to be out there with you. I'll be there in spirit, kind of motivating you. You can take some feedback and motivation and positivity that you've gotten in the log and go with it. But again, like when things get tough, you're the one out there. And we've had athletes text us during races and things like that, which I always find really surprising.
Autonomous decision-making is the number one race skill. Eating, autonomous decision-making. That's what you need.
Yeah. I have to lower this. Sorry. It's too much.
Also, maybe don't text your coaches in the middle of a race.
Yeah, definitely. Like,
don't do that.
There's really nothing we're going to be able to tell you at that point that's like all that helpful. Besides, like, keep going.
Well, good question, Drew. Thanks. I don't find it hard to keep track of this stuff at this point. I've been doing this for the better part of at least 4 years.
I feel like by the time someone by the time someone lines up to a 100, like I know everything about them. I know what their ferritin levels are. I know their kids' names. I know when their mom's birthday is. And like, that's kind of where I want to be. Like, that's how well I want to know you before you do the 100.
Yeah.
That's like where I feel like we've done enough like training and like we've really got a relationship and you've like put in the work.
Yeah. I feel, I think that you kind of hit it right there. Like when you really get to know the athlete, it's because the athlete, allowed the process to unfold over an appropriate amount of time. Mm-hmm. There are occasions where we get like really strong athletes who join Microcosm and, have had a lot of training history before. And so maybe you don't know them quite as well when they go into their first 100, but like ideally a lot of people are working towards their first hundreds, like over the course of a year, or 2 years or 3 years. For me, I'm looking at doing 100 and I'm looking at a 10-year process probably to make that happen, from like the actual start of when I started working with a coach to when like I'm actually going to run 100. And that's because, that's the process of mastery. I feel like you really have to put, the time.
And again, you don't need to run an ultra if running ultras doesn't make you happy. Drew's sitting there. He's like, I get to spend every Saturday afternoon with my gorgeous family.
Yeah.
I don't need to run.
There's a lot of pressure on my side to like run 100-miler. And I'm being completely honest, I have no interest in that whatsoever. I like running my 14, 16-mile long run and being done, and I can walk. I'm not limping. I don't have to like lay down all day. I can play with my kids. Like that's just where it's at right there. So don't feel pressure to run ultras if you're not into it.
I do really want you to run the JFK 50. We talk about it all the time.
I'll eventually,
we're obsessed with your speed potential.
Yeah, I hear you. You can be my coach when that happens 20 years from now.
20 years when we're 60 years old.
Drew's not 40.
Yeah, we're
close. I might look it, but I'm not 40.
Yeah. All right, when we're 55.
Prime ultra years.
Prime JFK 50 years.
Masters, super masters category.
Super masters, the geriatrics category. Just me and Drew limping along at the JFK 50. I don't know. Maybe. If my body holds up, we'll see. I think Drew's got, yeah, you have so much potential, man. But again, like people, ask yourself, why am I choosing this goal? Sometimes good to ask yourself that before race day, and really connect with your why. Because we have there's a lot of data out there that actually suggests that if you're connecting to something greater than yourself during a big endurance event, you're much more likely to finish that event because you're able to kind of push through the inevitable kind of low, dark moments that exist out there. You're much more motivated to find the light on the other side, and to keep going. So, hey, if you're racing tomorrow, you're listening. I see a couple people on the call right now that are racing hundreds tomorrow. Yeah, think about your why a little bit today.
And be eating
have that
on this call
in your back
please.
pocket. Yeah,
Be
hydrate.
filling up those glycogen stores.
Well, cool. Yeah, we have a bunch of questions, even though Drew kind of hit us with a heavy hitter to start, but I like that about Drew. He's always willing to ask a great question. Yeah, maybe in the same kind of vein as racing, we'll talk about the training logs and race recaps. There's 2 questions about that this week that I think are really, really important. Yeah, we'll start with the training log question here. And thank you to the author of this question, because I think this is really beneficial for everybody on the entire team. We talk a lot about training logs and how as athletes, we should write these to be most effective. Are there any adjectives that you find particularly helpful in the logs?
I feel like if an athlete, like words that really to me are kind of like whoop, red flag, like we're going to change things up, are words like fatigue, heavy legs. Yeah, fatigue or heavy legs. Fatigue to me it's more than being sleepy. It's not like, oh, I would like to nap. It's like I have a deep-seated physical, like there's a lack of energy needed to train and do normal life things. Heavy legs to me signals under recovery in a similar way that I think a lot of times is related to potentially like either running workouts too hard. And like sometimes you're just going to have heavy legs on Thursday, like the day after your workouts, and that's normal and fine. But a lot of times I feel like it can also mean that you're like, maybe we're not covering all of our nutritional bases, and there could be a reason we're not springing back from workouts quite as effectively. I also look for things like stiffness, soreness, things that, really just anything that indicates under recovery, and like we need to switch up the training stimulus because this person's not adapting. And if I can't force you to rest more, I can force you to train less.
Totally. I think that's all awesome. Drew, you want to kind of expound on the tired and fatigue thing that you've just written in the chat?
I do. Yeah. So to me, if you're tired, you're like, man, like I'm tired. I slept for like 4 hours last night because I had a newborn yelling at me all night. So like I'm tired. I'm not fatigued. And so when you're in your log, try to use those adjectives, descriptors that I guess are more, I don't want to say, I want you to be accurate. Like if you're fatigued because your mileage is too high, or you've been running hard workouts and your body is tired, try to use a word like fatigue. I'm feeling fatigued. To me personally, fatigue is more of a physical description. When you haven't slept well, you're not fatigued, you're tired. I know that sounds really redundant, I guess, but trying to use maybe as many adjectives as possible to describe how you're feeling can also be useful. Maybe if you're like, man, I'm feeling kind of run down, I'm feeling heavy, I'm feeling fatigued, I'm feeling tired, like use everything, throw everything in the kitchen sink at your description, so that as a coach, we can maybe better understand where you're coming from and how to approach it. Is, not a whole lot to it, I guess, but that's kind of where my mind's at right now.
Yeah, Drew, I think that's really important, right? Like, something that I think about a lot as a coach is whether or not athletes are processing any of the information they give me before they start writing in the training log. Because often what I see from a variety of different people is a lot of unprocessed information that seems like stream of consciousness. And then it feels like to me at the end of the check-in, I have to figure out, is this person actually fatigued or are they tired? Are they sore from the workout yesterday? I'm not really sure because this is a lot of information that is void of processing. So yes, it's so important to be accurate. Take 5 minutes if you can to think about what you're going to write in the log before you do it. Because if you write all of this stuff and it really isn't coherent, you're asking me to decide for you how you feel. And that isn't okay. You need to tell me how you feel so that way I can shape the training thereafter based on exactly how you feel. You know your body best. So you have to interpret and get better at interpreting your body feedback and then articulating that in a concise way to the coach so the coach can then change your training or leave your training the same or give you some feedback, whatever it is, support. So again, like there are going to be differences, fatigue, that's like a very underlying feeling, right? Like I feel like tiredness on a day-to-day basis. Fatigue, that's like multiple days in a row. Again, like fatigue, Drew, I think you nailed it. Feeling run down. That sounds like fatigue to me. Things like heavy legs, soreness, overwhelmed, anything in the mental and emotional category too. Like I'm feeling really impatient. I'm feeling really grumpy. Things like that I hear from athletes. A lot of the time, those are indicative of like other issues that might be happening behind the scenes. Like, for example, one of the biggest primers for not feeling good, heavy legs, soreness, grumpiness, fatigue, just not eating enough protein after your workouts and things like that.
I noticed that when I'm overextending myself physically, I actually I have mental and emotional side effects before I even feel fatigued or like lose appetite or lose sleep. Like I'll be very impatient, short-tempered, and I'll just like cry at the drop of a hat. And like that to me, like I used to just be like, oh, you're a weirdly, like, I don't know, like, but it is like, that is for me, like that's the first sign that I'm overextending myself.
Yeah, totally. And so that's like really, really important. And like the words that you use, you should think about them before you write them in the training log, because there's another person on the other side of that screen who, has to take that information, assimilate it, and then make it into feedback or a training plan moving forward. So like if you're not using adjective, and there are so many ways to describe how you feel, but if you're not using something and it's not concise, you're asking your coach to do a job that is really, really basically impossible to do, which is to interpret how you feel. And you're the one that feels how you feel, doesn't go the other way. I'm curious what maybe Kristen and Kylee, kind of your thoughts are on this. Kristen or Kylee?
Yeah. I think that Kylee, you can go first.
Okay. I mean, I don't really have anything that's much different than that. I guess I would just say I look for patterns. And so, like you were saying, like it could be like a day of fatigue or tiredness or whatever. And, I'll just be like, okay, let's keep an eye on it. Or like pain is another thing. If somebody's talking about pain somewhere or soreness in weird areas. And then if that repeats for a couple of days, then I'll address that and adjust the log. So I guess that's the only real difference for me. And then, if an athlete's not updating their log regularly and like writing in it, and then they come in the log like a week later and they're like, I have this thing going on. And I'm like, oh, well, you didn't update the log. So
I had a dime.
That's the other thing. That's getting off on a different topic, but at the same time, making sure you keep your logs updated pretty regularly. And then kind of like you guys were saying, the mental and emotional descriptors are the most helpful for me too. Not that I don't want to hear about any other social life things going on, but for training related things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think too, using certain words like just like Zoe and TJ mentioned, like fatigue versus tired, things like that. I know it varies between athletes, and like some athletes kind of use the log as almost like a journal entry, which is totally fine with me. But I think that finding the patterns and staying consistent is the most important thing.
Yeah, totally. I think you guys are both right. Something really interesting that you mentioned, Kristen, consistency. Kylee mentioned if you're not checking into the log regularly, and kind of what I hear from that is like, without the consistent check-ins, without entering into the log regularly, it's really hard for a coach to see the patterns, to really get to know kind of your descriptors and your language, the way that you actually write and kind of describe what you're going through. I think, that probably warrants maybe an entire call about people who don't check in regularly. We were just talking about it this morning, how, as a coach, I get very frustrated with people who go, 6, 7, 8 days without checking into the log, and then check in for 6, 7 days.
They'll
and it's
always
just
say
like
something like, life is crazy, I'm super overwhelmed. That is the most important information for us to know. Like,
Right.
We cannot adjust your training without that information. Also, it takes literally 10 seconds to type in, life is super busy, I feel totally overwhelmed. So like,
that's a great point, Zoe. If I could
find
just
excuses.
interject real quick. It's not just writing, I'm overwhelmed, period. Like, obviously we want your logs to be concise. You're not our only athlete. We have several athletes. We got to get through them. So being concise is so important. Get to the point. But at the same time, why? Why are you tired? Why are you overwhelmed? Just real quick, tell me about it. Is it the training? Is it your personal life? Is it school? Like, what's going on? And that can kind of help us maybe guide your plan down a different path that might make it easier for you.
Exactly, Drew. And I think that just kind of goes back to what I said. Spend a couple minutes processing your feelings and your run before you enter in the log. I'm not so sure I'm as big of a fan of using the log as a journal entry anymore as I used to be when I first started coaching, because I feel it almost makes my job harder as a coach. Because again, when we're stream of consciousness in the training log, you start to ask the coach to fill in all of these blanks for you. And I feel, as the human behind the screen, absorbing all of the information that you give me, that it's asking a lot of me to tell myself how you feel. And that is really challenging. You need to tell me how you feel. You have to do it in a way that is communicative, rather than this stream of consciousness where I'm like, okay, I don't really know what's happening here.
I know what time you took your children to school, but I have no idea how you feel.
And so like processing that information can also be really, really helpful for the athlete. Deep thinking is really important for people to spend time doing every single day. Think about, I spend 3 minutes in my training log with my coach. I'm going to spend 3 minutes after my run processing that information. So then I can convey to the person behind the computer who's dictating my training plan, like how I'm actually feeling, maybe what the causes of that thing are, because the causes are really important. If you want, support from your coach, it's really vital to understand the kind of like the causes behind these things. And so, something that I've really started to get back to, which I did early on in my coaching personally, is that when I get a really long check-in and it feels like stream of consciousness and I'm not sure about something, I don't provide support. I ask a question to elicit a more kind of focused and detail-oriented response, in which then I can provide better support on top of. And that is, yes, much more time consuming for me. And I coach a number of athletes and have my time, the demand on my time is really high. But that always gets closer to the place that I wanted to originally be at when the athlete first checked in. So I would recommend that to the coaches. And if you're an athlete who avoids my questions, come on, help me out. Like I'm putting the effort in to help you get to a certain outcome. And I do appreciate when people answer the questions that I ask in the logs. Yeah, should we move on to this question about race reports? I feel like we definitely talked that one. And this is very similar, again, in the same vein. And thank you to the author of this question, who authored both of these questions, actually. There has been a lot of discussion about race recaps on the calls lately. What kind of information is helpful for a coach to see in a post-race check-in?
Wow, I love this one. And also I do want to, like, I think I was pretty harsh last time we talked about race reports. And so just know that you are valuable and loved no matter how wordy you are. But I do feel that as a professional writer and elite athlete, I am somewhat qualified to give advice on this. So, you know, I think like a rule that I use for my own writing is the 60-40 rule. The amount of time I'm going to spend generating a body of work, 60% of it is going to be spent thinking and planning, and 40% or less is going to be spent actually writing. If you just like open up a Word doc and start blasting away, that's not going to be a very useful way of communicating. If you want to journal, that's a great way of journaling. I think there's a lot of really great benefits to journaling, but a race report and a journal entry are very different because your audience is different, because at the other end of a race report, there is another human, and at the other end of a journal entry, there's not another human. So you really, to write anything, need to consider your audience. If your audience is your coach or your friends on Facebook, that's going to change how you construct a race report. The way that I construct my race reports for my coach, and they're like about 6 sentences long, even for like a 12-hour race, my coach gets 6 sentences max, is what we're going to do more of in training, what we're going to do less of, and what we're going to win on. And what that looks like for me, like specifically in the context of Telluride Mountain Run, what I'm going to do more of is continuing to focus on economy and strength training, because I felt like both of those were hugely beneficial in my performance at Telluride Mountain Run. What I'm going to focus less on, like my not to-do list, I think in training, because you only have so much energy, it's important to figure out which things you're going to prioritize and then deprioritize. For me, I did a couple training runs with trekking poles.
Yeah.
Poles,
trekking poles, same.
Poles leading up to Telluride Mountain Run. And I didn't feel it was a good use of my time and energy. And I don't feel that it served me well on race day. So I'm going to deprioritize that going forward. What I'm going to win on is the thing that I absolutely like crushed it on. Like that's the thing that I'm really solid about. And that's the thing that gives me my edge in competition. And I felt like for TMR, what I did really, really well was, and I felt like I power hiked really well, fueled really well, and stayed mentally engaged. And I feel like that's where I won on. And that's all, like that information is good information because it's assimilated, it's processed, and it's ready to be put into practice. It's not useful for me to get a play-by-play of like what happens like from mile 5 to 9 and then mile 26 to 38, like that, you know, it's kind of like like you're trying to find the signal in the noise. To me, a good race report delivers the information to my coach on what I feel is going well, what I feel is not important to prioritize in training, and what I am rock solid on and where I feel like I get my edge from.
I just took so many notes so I could improve my race reporting with my coach. That's awesome. I mean, Zoe, I think that you really nailed it. I do want to hear from the other coaches, maybe Drew or.
Yeah, no, real quick, just brief. I don't like calling it a race report. I just like calling it just a brief race recap. Report to me makes it sound like you're required to write like a 4-page document. Personally, not for me, not for anyone else. For me, I don't like race reports or race recaps. I've never written one in my entire 20 years of racing. I just don't see the purpose for me. However, kind of like what Zoe said, like it's if it's for you, like know your audience. If it's a journal entry, do your thing, like write it down so that you can maybe go back and review and do whatever. But I don't want anyone to feel pressure. Like I feel like race report at one time was kind of like the thing you had to do every time you ran a long race. It's like, well, I got to do my race report now. I don't want to, but I have to because everyone else does. Like that's bullshit. Just do what you want to do what makes you happy. And if writing a long ass report for yourself to look back on later makes you happy, do it. If you don't want to, don't. It's all up to you.
Yeah, but like it just has to be different. Like I get so crazy, like it makes me so crazy to see that the report someone might write for themselves is the same as for me, because in newsflash, I am not you. Like we are separate entities, and you must alter all modes of communication to reflect the person they're supposed to land on.
Well, I think that is an important sign of intelligence often, is that you read your audience, right? Like that's what you mentioned before, is having that, being able to kind of differentiate between like who you're communicating with in every interaction. I mean, that's coaching 101, you know, being able to differentiate between one athlete and another. Every athlete is different and requires a slightly different mode of communication. That's how I think of it. And you tailor that communication over time as you get to know that person. And it's the same when you're writing that race report, when you're doing your check-ins. I personally, my check-ins with my coach are a little bit more descriptive than Zoe's. I looked at Zoe's from TMR and was like, oh my God, that is very concise. But I think that, again, you know, the process of processing the information ahead of time and then getting down to, you know, what went well, what went right, what I want to work on, what, you know, and kind of like maybe what we don't need to focus on as much the next time. Hammering those kind of things and making them very obvious in your check-in. I love to hear from people about like the low moment that they kind of work through and how they did that, whether it was through fueling well or a mantra or affirmation, or they were connecting to their why. I think that in ultra running, it's the mental aspect of the racing is so important. I want to hear from my athletes about how they engaged in that part of the process. And that is, I would consider that to be a big bullet point to hit as well. I know Kylee or Kristen, it sounded like one of you guys wanted to jump in, so I just wanted to turn it over to you.
Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I was just going to agree with everything that Drew said and Zoe said. I think that sometimes you can go overboard, obviously, but reading your audience and having that self-awareness goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Kylee, what are your thoughts?
I've also never done a race report ever. But I do think it's important to like analyze for yourself, especially for these longer races. And I have never done a 50 or 100 miler. So that's the other thing, is I think sometimes with the longer races, there's more to kind of look through and see what you might be able to improve upon next time. But especially with things like, you know, your nutrition, your nutrition leading up to the race, your pull, like the things you were mentioning with equipment, all that stuff. I think that's good to just look over and see what you could improve upon next time. And I think especially for those that it's their first time, like it takes a while to get better at these kind of races. And you know, even a marathon, like your first marathon on the road or whatever, it's like typically not going to be your best marathon. So what would you do better next time? So I agree with Drew. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this formal, like 4-page written thing, but just going through in your head and maybe saying to yourself, like, what could I have done better? Or what could I do better next time? And make a plan for yourself and communicate that with your coach. Like, oh, my nutrition was really off at this point. Like, I think I, you know, need to have a discussion with so-and-so, or I need to dial this better during my training, etc.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think, you know, again, like equipment can be part of this, you know, whether the polls worked or the polls didn't work, you know, whether or not like the fueling that you were using was working. You know, again, you know, one of the biggest issues I have sometimes with the training logs is that there's no deep thinking that goes in ahead of time before people write in the log. And then it is extremely hard for me to refer back to any sections of that log to find that good information. Like the poles didn't work for me, you know, or like I used liquid fueling Tailwind and it made my stomach upset and I threw up. And like a year later, I'm training with the same athlete for the same race and they're still using Tailwind, and it's very difficult. You know, don't expect me to always remember Tailwind didn't work for you. Like that's why we can key search things in the training log. But if it's, you know, some small bit of information.
I feel like Tailwind's one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and control F for Tailwind.
Of course, or like something that I control for a lot is blood testing to see when the last blood test was. And sometimes the conversation about blood testing is in this body of 500-word text. And it's so hard to figure out exact, like where, you know, where was the data though? Like, okay, December 2020, so-and-so got their blood work done. A week later, they got the results. Like, you know, all of these things super important for a coach. But if that information is unprocessed going in, then again, like I have to reprocess that information again for you. And you need to do that for yourself. It's the same with the race. You know, do your thing. You can write it, you can do bullet points. Something that I'm trying to work on in my own, you know, and how I reflect on races is, you know, a bullet point about each kind of thing that I hit. Like, you know, fueling wasn't great. Mile 30 to 35, I got off my game. Next race, really need to make sure that I'm on top of this. Poles worked very well. The power hiking was super strong. Like, trying to be concise. So it's right there. It's very easy to reference. That is so important. Also, there's a lot of data out there about the process of deep thinking. You should be engaged in that process as often as you can, every day, honestly.
Writing is not always the
possible.
same thing as thinking.
Just taking some time to think, to assimilate your thoughts, whether they're on work, life, partnership, whatever is going on. You have all of these facets to your life. Trying to organize them, make sense of them, is a part of also moving forward and getting better in anything that you're doing and that you're pursuing. So sometimes that process isn't actually happening in the training log or during the training or the race report. So, you know, that's something that I have had to work on as an athlete is getting to the heart of the matter a little bit more quickly and including like the life stuff that is really important without giving a play-by-play of my entire day, which is quite honestly, as a coach is unhelpful because again, it's just a lot of information that isn't necessarily processed, right? Like I love going back to what Drew said, like think about the kind of the root causes to how you feel. That's what you really need to include because we're looking to develop healthy habits around those things, improve in those areas. So if we can think deeply about what is actually happening, that information we can take, we can build awareness on that and turn that awareness into action moving forward. Yeah, great. Let's move on to a different kind of question here.
Keep it short.
Keep it short. Keep it short. I'm terrible at brevity on these calls, so I'm going to work on that. Okay. This question's been in here for a few weeks, and I think that we're going to nail it. Do you personally, or do you ever recommend for your female athletes to consider modifications to either nutritional needs or training intensity based on the phase of their menstrual cycle? Coaches. Or I can go first.
Actually, I would love to hear Kylee because she wrote a fantastic piece for Trail Runner about information gained from the cycle and how nutritionally you can respond to that. And I think that that is important and it is backed by a good bit of data, and Kylee speaks to it very intelligently.
Okay.
Yes,
Well, first off,
lovely.
I think I do have a couple of athletes that actually we have a column in their training log for their cycle, and we're just kind of tracking like how they feel on certain days, and then you can kind of pick up patterns that might occur. And I think that that can be helpful. It can be helpful for people, I think sometimes, I'm not saying that women make excuses, but they're like, well, I can't do this because of my cycle. You know, you can do these things. But if you notice that like every single time you get your period, like you're just like exhausted and you don't feel good, then maybe you don't schedule a race for when you get your cycle, like when you actually get your period on that day. So it can be helpful in that sense. And then if we're looking at, there's also a number of apps that you can do that with too. But if we're looking at the nutritional side of things, in regards to, I think number one, it's important to realize that there's not that much research out on this in regards to like what you can do for your nutrition to kind of help with adjusting to symptoms, I guess. So like Stacy Sims has her book, but some of the things that she says in there are just really like big extrapolations on like a single study.
From
So you
like
have to be
6 women
careful.
who are like elite race walkers. So
Yeah.
like big old grain of salt.
Yeah.
You know, like we would never, and I think that just sorry, caveat, that's a huge frustration I have, particularly with the science done on women, is like in no world would we, I mean, yes, in this world, because we live in the bad place, scientifically speaking. Like you would take a study of 6 elite male race walkers and tell all men to do a certain thing because of one very narrow study done in Australia 25 years ago. But we do it with women all the time because we're just like so excited that there's any information that like, while I think Stacy Sims is brilliant, there is a lot of stuff where it's like, oh yeah, fish oil, double down on fish oil because one study showed it could maybe be beneficial.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And it's like when I work with athletes, a lot of them want this like specific protocol that is for nutrition that's out there for women and their cycle. And I think there are a couple of things that we know. So typically like a week before you're set for your period to start, your metabolism is elevated by about 10%. So including like a couple extra 100 to 200 calorie snack or something. That's something easy that you could implement. We do know that there is increased utilization of protein and fat in the second half of your cycle. So an emphasis on making sure that you're timing your like post-workout nutrition with protein in it, or making sure, especially during that time, not that you shouldn't always meet your protein needs, but making sure that you're meeting your protein needs in that second half of your cycle. And then the first half, there's increased use of carbohydrate. So making sure during that first half that you're getting in enough carbohydrate. There's no like restriction or anything going on there. Stacy Sims does have that protocol in regards to like you take a baby aspirin and then fish oil and then magnesium as well, like a week before. And I have had, interestingly enough, I've had a couple of athletes do that, and it's mixed. Like some people it does help, but it's not going to be like necessarily a cure-all. So
You have to do a double blind.
Yeah. So it's
fish
supposed to
oil
help with like
aspirin test.
PMS symptoms and like when you get your period cramping and things like that. I mean, if you're at the point where it is like really impacting you and your functioning, then you might want to try it. Like there's no harm in trying something like that. I would say that the things that she recommends, like the aspirin, magnesium, fish oil, those are all things that if you take them acutely, it's not going to cause any like long-term side effects or impact your training or something like that. So I would say those are the main things. And then the last piece would be like the electrolyte piece. Sometimes we do like right around our cycle need increased intake of electrolytes during that time. So those are just like a couple of things that you can take and maybe apply to your training. But again, there's no specific like protocol that's like every female needs to do this for throughout their cycle. And those things that I mentioned are really the only ones that there's some kind of at least more substantial research behind.
Yeah, obviously somebody's at our door. Sorry about that.
Bowie is just so excited about discussing female physiology.
Yeah, so that information is super important. Actually, Kylie, thank you. That was very educational for me. I think I don't have any athletes who are actually currently tracking this stuff in their training logs, which is surprising considering my team is probably 80% female.
I have it's kind of like Kylie said, I have some athletes who have really consistent cycles and consistent side effects track it, but I also rarely preemptively alter training because sure, while maybe you'll be 4% more effective on a certain day in your cycle, that's awesome. But I don't know, man, if you ever want to run Western States, they're not going to move it for your cycle, or
right.
You can't rearrange your life around for better or worse. I'm not saying but we shouldn't be more if you have actual symptoms, we are always going to accommodate that in the training because I don't want you going out there and trying to force a huge workout if you are having a hard time regulating your core temperature, if you are cramping, bloating, if something is painful, no, we're not going to go try to bang out 5x3 minute hills. But we're not going to try to be oh, let's eke out marginal gains to the detriment of long-term health and well-being. Maybe it would be different if we were trying to qualify for, or trying to win the Olympic marathon, but I don't not even, even the most elite athletes aren't really doing that. You're not seeing a lot of folks do it for a performance perspective. You do see a lot of folks do it for side effect management. And I think it's always just important to recognize that having a regular healthy cycle is a huge win and should be celebrated because it means that you are treating your body with the respect and dignity it deserves.
Totally. I think that's all great information. And I would go so far as to say, if you're an athlete who's experiencing discomfort, and many of the athletes that I coach, when they are, at that time of the month, they go as so far as to express how they feel in regards to their menstrual cycle. And that is really important for a coach to know, because we can adjust the training. And I do this, it's always done on a daily basis. It's never done preemptively with my athletes, but on a daily basis, I'll look at kind of the feedback that I'm getting. And then if an athlete is having a period of discomfort, we will kind of tailor, kind of scale things down. You either go to an aerobic phase of training or kind of, take away some intensity. Because I think that there are some gains to be made, particularly on the mental and emotional side of training. There's a tax every time you go out and do your training, whether you're aware of it or not. There's a physical tax and there's a mental tax. And if you're running through discomfort, particularly doing workouts through a lot of discomfort, I think there is more of a mental tax and possibly more of a physical tax as well.
And it's going to be less beneficial.
Right. So again, we don't necessarily preemptively move this stuff around, or I don't. One, because there isn't a lot of hard science, and the gains have been shown to be really marginal, 2 to 3% maybe. And sometimes changing up the way that we're distributing the stresses during the week can throw an athlete off as well. So we really want to be careful when we're, making those changes. It kind of can go back to athletes who want to constantly change their schedule every single week. That's not always good for regularity and feeling grounded in a training process, which can have side effects too. So, with everything, it's all about what you tell the coach. If you're not conveying information about your cycle, don't expect your coach to do anything. But if you do feel like it would be beneficial to, not do workouts kind of during the most intense parts of your cycle, great. Let's definitely try to make that a down week. And we can change that on the fly, or we can schedule that ahead of time. But again, when we're working towards races and things like that, you might have to race under those circumstances. So practicing that a little bit in training could probably be helpful too.
You don't want to force it again, through discomfort, but there are benefits to learning how to manage and also not create self-fulfilling prophecies around oh, I will feel this way next Wednesday. It's more oh, when you get to Wednesday, if you're feeling that way, you can say it makes sense. I feel this way.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And the self-fulfilling prophecy thing, I think, is also really interesting and probably is a subject of another call too.
Yeah.
I just want to take that and run. All right, well, thank you guys. I hope there's some good information there. I
But
know
yay,
Trail Runner
cycles.
published a good article about the cycle maybe a month ago
and
or so.
recovery
And recovery.
and how it affects recovery, because there are recovery effects.
Speaking of cycles.
Less so than alcohol. So,
Oh, really?
oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, way more marginal.
So let's stop.
Beer,
drinking.
worse for you.
All right. We have one last question. What do I want to do? What do I want to do?
That's not to say that like periods or your cycle is detrimental to training, because it's not, because there are like obvious upswings. It's a cycle. So like there are.
All right, we're on the subject of cycles here.
I just think it's important to note, because I feel like for so long in athletics, it's been framed as like how to deal with this like crappy thing that happens to you. And it's a great thing that means you are healthy. And there are, particularly for endurance athletes, benefits to that hormone cycling. So like, just, I think it's in discussions like this important to not frame it from like assuming the non-menstruating human is the default human experience. It is not the default human experience. And we need better science to help us implement training protocols at every stage of that cycle.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that context. I think that was really helpful. Okay. So we have a question about training cycles. What are the pros and cons of a 10-day training cycle? I'm sure, like most things, the answer depends on the athlete. Well, great.
Well, so the answer depends on the athlete.
No, I'll start this off. I think it's funny that this author picked a 10-day training cycle, because there are 30-day training cycles, there are 14-day training cycles, there's a 7-day training cycle, there's a 12-week training cycle. Everything, we're always in a training cycle. So yeah, I think the way that I'm kind of interpreting this question is, why do we do training on a weekly basis? Why do we do workouts in the middle of the week? Why do we do long runs as the second to last day of the week in general? There's a reason why we want that stress distribution. There's a reason why we look at maybe a 7-day training week in the context of each athlete that we coach. The reasoning for all of this is, one, the 7-day work week. It's just that simple. You guys are all working. We're all working, right? Like, we work Sunday through Friday afternoon. You guys work Monday through Friday. Maybe some of you guys work on the weekends, depending on our healthcare, providing athletes and things like that. The 7-day kind of training week works really well for most athletes because it fits into the context of your life. When you start to include things like a 10-day train, a 10 days on, 1 day off, 14 days on with 1 day off, that can get a little messy, and it's a lot harder to kind of control for like the life variables, the stresses that underlie everything that we're doing. We want to start the week with that rest day. For most people, that's on a Monday. One, because Mondays are a tough day at work. So not having to train on a Monday can be really helpful. Also, we want to start the day off with the week off with the training, with a rest day. And we consider that a training day, being mindful of your rest, a good part of training, is we want you to go into the week feeling fresh, and you're also using that day to recover from the training stresses of the previous week. We do, again, the third day in the week. If Monday is day 1, Wednesday is day 3 is your workout. And that's because for neuromuscular reasons, we want you to have run 1 day before your workout, because running is so neuromuscular that essentially the more often you do it, the better you're going to feel. So if you run easy the day before your workout, you're going to be primed for that workout and you're going to be able to get more out of it. It's this, and then because you're getting so much out of it, there's impact forces associated with that. We need to make sure that you're recovering well. We want an easy day and a rest day or a cross training day or 2 easy days to come before, your next heaviest day of stress, which is going to be Saturday, when you do your long run. And so that's kind of, the 7-day kind of training week is really a great way to control for all of these life variables, the life happenings that happen for everybody. There are definitely a million other ways to train, and those might work for professional athletes who don't have day jobs. We do the 7-day kind of training week as well, and feel like it's most beneficial because you can control for those variables a lot easier, and you always have that consistent rest happening.
And also, your body has no idea what a week is. It has no idea what a day is. It truly doesn't understand what a mile is. All it understands is stress and rest. But using a week as a proxy allows us to, have those like kind of section off stress in a way that makes sense in terms of like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you get like your day before your workout, you're recovering from the workout, and then you get a reset, a down day before another big block of stress, which is the weekend runs. And again, your body doesn't know what a week is. And like, that's something, we get a lot of athletes ask, like, how many hours do I need between runs? And the answer is, it depends. If you just go and hammer a workout and then wake up like 8 hours later and try to do an easy run, that's going to feel different than if you do a workout at lunch and then you eat well, sleep well, eat well again, get up and do an easy run. Like, your body isn't like, oh, it's finally, it's been 18 hours, I'm ready to go. It matters how much stress you put on it, and then how much space you gave it to adapt to that stress, how much rest.
Right. And to be clear, adaptation happens when you're resting, not when you're continuously training.
Yeah. When you're training, you're breaking yourself down, which is important. But if you never rest, you're never getting the adaptation.
You're never adapting.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the last couple of minutes, I don't know if any of the other coaches have, more context to kind of bring to this question. This question's been on the question sheet for like a month.
So I'd never heard of a 10-day training cycle. This training for 7 days is what is normal and routine. I think that's what most of us do. I think 10 days was created by people who are maybe semi-casual runners that just want more rest because running's hard because they're less consistent. But our races are on weekends. Like, there's not like a random race on like a Wednesday or Thursday and then a training walk. That's, well, yeah, since all of us are training for UTMB.
Right, since we're all training for UTMB.
But in that we can, I guess, have our week set up so that we can train long runs, hard runs for the weekends. That better prepares our bodies. I believe that we're all creatures of habit, but we can prepare our bodies for that long run, that long race on the weekend. If every long run is on the weekend, it just makes sense.
Yeah. It does. I think it's so important to be grounded with a consistent training schedule. Maybe just as the last kind of, the last, like, this is what I'll say. The more often that you can stick to your schedule and the less amount of time that you have to continually change things up, your body really does ground in those habits. And you will start to feel like, for me on Wednesday, whether I'm running a workout or not, I'm always primed to run a little bit faster. Like, as soon as I get out there, it's like, I know it's so routine. I've been doing it for 4 years or however long. And that is really true. You start to really hone in on days like Saturday. This is that day where mentally I'm out there for longer. Being grounded in a routine is huge. The 7-day kind of week, I think, makes the most sense.
And again, you'll see like some random study on elite cyclists in Austria, and it'll say like, well, they were 8% more efficient on a 14-day cycle. That's awesome. I have no idea if they have kids, if they have jobs, what they do, how they eat, if they have personal chefs. Like, we don't know any of that. We do know that the best training intervention is the intervention you are able to sustain. So if a 7-day cycle works for you and spurs adaptation, then it is the correct cycle for you. And emulating the pros is not always the best heuristic for designing training that works for like a normal human life.
Totally. And you can be a pro and a normal human with a job.
Very true.
and many of the athletes on this team are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. That was such a great call today. Yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Happy Friday. We
Happy
made it.
Friday.
Yay.
Yay. Oh man. Awesome.